Hello, Cardstack community. I'm Chris C., the founding director of the Cardstack project, coming to you from the land of the Web3. Welcome to another episode of Web3 Watch Fireside Chat, where we speak with industry professionals about their work on building the decentralized world with Web3, DeFi, DAO, and various decentralized ledger technology being a part of this amazing new ecosystem we're putting together. Today, I am so glad to be joined by Hasker, who is a CMO for Hedera, which is one of the longer running projects within the crypto sphere, really trying to bring usability and mass market adoption to these nascent world of blockchain, but doing it in a way that allows people who have big ambitions about enterprise adoption and commercial adoption to have a sensible way to say, hey, this can actually happen. This is technology ready for prime time. Welcome, Christian.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris. I'm delighted to be here today and looking forward to our chat.
Absolutely. It's really interesting to see the organization that kind of began with an idea, with the idea of hashgraph, kind of grow into this ecosystem under the umbrella of Hedera. Can you give us a little bit of a kind of a sense of where the Hedera ecosystem is going and what brought you into this space, and what is your role and what do you see your own contribution to this field?
Yeah, sure. So I'd actually say it started with a math problem. Dr. Lehman Baird, who is, along with Mance Harmon, the co-founder of Hedera, in about 2012, he set out to solve a math problem, which is how do computers in a decentralized network come to consensus on both the veracity and the order of transactions in a way that is both incredibly fast and also has finality and with the highest security possible. And so he set out to solve this math problem, and for years he convinced himself it just wasn't possible. He would tackle the problem and then set it aside, and then he'd come back to it because he really likes math problems and puzzles and things like that.
Yeah, unsolved math problems are the most interesting math problem to mathematicians.
Yeah, and because it's been solved if you want it very slow with high security, and it's been solved if you want it fast with no security. But he set out to solve these two things. And then in 2015, he had this breakthrough that he named hashgraph. And hashgraph is a consensus algorithm which has these properties. It's incredibly fast. It uses something called gossip about gossip, which I can talk about in a little bit. And it has this property of asynchronous Byzantine fault tolerance, which is the highest degree of security you can have in a distributed system. And so, one of the things that I love to think about is if Bitcoin did not exist, most of our industry would not exist. But hashgraph would still exist and Hedera would still exist. And that's because Lehman didn't set out to build a better blockchain. He set out to solve this math problem. So Hedera was founded back in 2018, and the white paper was launched then. And yes, as you said, there was this vision. And after we published the white paper, we've just set about relentlessly executing on that vision. And Hedera is both the public network, so the technology, but it's also this decentralized governing body, this professional governing council. And there are really these two sides to Hedera. It's not just the tech, it's also the governance as well. That both are unique in our industry and allow for applications that are not possible on other public networks.
Would you consider the kind of governing body of Hedera a DAO, or in the spirit of a DAO, or do you think that's a different structure than what people talk about right now with DAOs and Discord groups and communities and such?
That's a really great question, and it's something that the governing council has talked about. So They are an LLC, so a limited liability corporation, and they join the LLC. So when a governing council member joins, it's really like going through a merger or acquisition for them. It's you go through all those legal loopholes. So in that sense, it is not a DAO because it's a different structure. However, we do, and they do, talk about it as being DAO-like because the governance happens on chain, right? They sign these transactions that happen on chain, whether it's for a software update or something around pricing. Minutes are published very transparently to the industry. So it definitely has these elements of a DAO. And I do believe over time, maybe it will morph into even more DAO-like. And it's interesting, when we set out in 2018, DAO wasn't really a term that was commonly used. And now obviously it's very prevalent in our industry. And yeah, it's a good way to have transparent governance, obviously.
Yeah, it's also really interesting that the DAO with the THE in front of it was a little bit of a thing to not talk too much about at this era. So the fact that that word came in full force is a testament of the importance of the letters of the DAO. Is it decentralized? Is it autonomous? And is it an organization? And I think we look at LLC, yeah, of course it's an organization. The question is really about the autonomous aspects of it, the transparency, maybe the automation, or at least the ability for people to act on the stimuli without having to go through a more traditional kind of like paper process. That's really interesting. On the network side of Hedera, obviously there's one or two proof of work blockchain that is still kind of like, what people outside crypto know about Bitcoin and Ethereum. And there's a lot of other blockchain that is considered proof of stake. And the consensus algorithm for those proof of stake blockchain differs from things earlier like dedicated proof of stake, DPoS, to things like Avalanche consensus. How do you characterize hashgraph as a consensus algorithm within the proof of stake discussion?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and we need to separate out two things. So one is that hashgraph consensus underpins all of the services on Hedera. So hashgraph, as I mentioned, has these properties of being incredibly high throughput, low latency, and very, very secure. We have three services that run on top. One is the Hedera consensus service that essentially exposes the hashgraph consensus algorithm to developers to build whatever you want, incredibly flexible service. And then we have the token service, which allows you to tokenize assets, issue your own cryptocurrency if you want to, and that inherits the properties of our own cryptocurrency, which is called HBAR, which is both incredibly fast, low latency, and very secure. So if you mint your own token on Hedera, it inherits those properties. And then we have a smart contract service that is fully EVM compatible smart contract service. So any smart contracts written in Solidity can be deployed on Hedera. You can use the smart contract service in conjunction with the other services or standalone. So now we talk about proof of stake. And I mentioned our cryptocurrency is HBAR. So in order to maintain the safety, the integrity, protect the network at scale, you need a scarce resource. In proof of work, that scarce resource is electricity, right? That's what they use. You're competing to add a block to the chain. It has done a great job at maintaining security, but it is wasteful and slow. So with our proof of stake system, HBAR, there are only ever going to be 50 billion HBAR minted.
Right.
So these HBAR will be staked to different nodes in the network. Right now, we're in a permissioned node phase where only the governing council members can run nodes in the network.
Mm-hmm.
So our trust model is very, very high. So proof of stake isn't that important for us right now. Mm-hmm. But later, probably by the end of this year, we'll be moving into a phase where community members will be able to run nodes on the network. And now proof of stake becomes very important because you want to ensure that the nodes are honest. And so you want to have your cryptocurrency staked to honest nodes in the network. Those that are dishonest cannot attract stake, they fall off of the network. So proof of stake is very effective for us as we scale the number of nodes and then go to a multi-sharded system in the future for maintaining the safety of the network. Mm-hmm. But the consensus algorithm is always hashgraph, and the protection system of the network is that scarce resource, which is the cryptocurrency.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you're seeing this as like one kind of like layered system where people can participate in the layer that they're comfortable with. So if you have developers building a dApp and they're willing to trust the underlying security of the network, they can just focus on deploying their contract in EVM that they have already, let's say, modified or forked or written from scratch. But if you want to participate in that governance and the security budget of the network, then you go kind of 2 layers below. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, correct. And I should say, when we move to this community node model, mm-hmm. Those are also permissioned nodes. And then the final phase of full decentralization is a fully permissionless node network. You know, you and I can join the network for a day, we can drop off, we can, you know, participate however we want in that model. And at that point, you know, we're really at that final phase.
Yeah. So it's interesting you talk about this, you know, essentially what Jesse Warden named progressive decentralization. You make a valuable piece of technology with a mathematical and a technical breakthrough, prove that it works at scale, and then you invite more community in, with decentralization not being the initial goal, getting in the way of the use case, but focusing on a use case and then decentralize the resource as a common good. And one question has always been that, you know, okay, now that we have this, let's say, a new type of consensus and new type of a way of ensuring security, is there a certain type of use case that is uniquely suited for the Hedera ecosystem that is not as possible in other approaches that took a different compromise along that kind of trade-off you mentioned before? What can't you do in another system that you can do with Hedera?
Yeah, so by the way, that was a great recap that you just gave. We wanted to start off relatively decentralized from the get-go with a very high trust model.
Right.
And then ensure that over time we become even more decentralized, which is sort of the flip side of what you see with some other projects that start off, you know, really decentralized, but then over time, maybe there are groups that consolidate power, they influence the network. So yeah, that was a very good summary. But you know, let's talk about the thesis of Hedera. You know, the thesis of hashgraph, of this consensus algorithm being incredibly high throughput, low latency, and very secure, and also incredibly low environmental footprint as well. Mm-hmm. You know, it is at the bounds of what is mathematically possible from an efficiency standpoint. The thesis has always been that Hedera will attract applications that simply are not possible on other networks. And we're beginning to see a little bit of that today with enterprises that are bringing applications to market that have to have incredible throughput and very, very low predictable cost. Mm-hmm. So just last week, Avery Dennison, which is the world's largest label maker and largest producer of RFID tags, they have a supply chain platform called Atma, and it has some of the world's leading brands on it. And what they do is they generate a digital fingerprint for every item, and they track and trace that now on the Hedera network, and also are bringing this capability to be able to offset the carbon footprint of these items as they flow through their life cycle from inception to production. Mm-hmm. And if you think about supply chain, it was one of the original blockchain use cases, right? But we never really saw it implemented at massive scale. And if you think about on a public network, there are billions and billions of these things that get manufactured that each one has to have its own digital identity, its own digital fingerprint on a network, trace it through the whole supply chain system, offset that carbon footprint. You're talking many, hundreds and then thousands, and over time, tens of thousands of transactions just from one sector, supply chain. That just is not possible on other networks today. Even if it is possible from a speed standpoint, which it is, there are networks out there that are optimizing for speed. There are layer 2 networks that are optimizing for speed. The cost associated with each one of those transactions is too high for an enterprise to deploy at scale. They need an incredibly low predictable cost per transaction. So one of the other things that the governing council has done is they set fees on the Hedera network. And for this type of very simple writing of data to the Hedera network, it's 1/100th of a penny, always. It's denominated in dollars. So it doesn't matter, we're in a volatile industry, right? The price of cryptocurrency can be high one day, low the next, very unpredictable. So they wanted to remove that unpredictability and say, okay, for our operational expense budgeting exercise, we need to know, if we use Amazon Web Services for an application, we need to be able to budget it. If we use Hedera for an application, we need to be able to budget it. So it's not just the high throughput, it's the low fees as well. So that is a use case that we're seeing today. Another one from 2 other council members, ServiceNow, which is this massive enterprise IT company. It counts all of the Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 customers are ServiceNow customers. Other council members are ServiceNow customers. So one of the customers is DLA Piper, which is the world's leading global law firm. So they, law firms are by nature incredibly decentralized as well, because you've got all of these subject matter experts in different parts of the world. And
different law, civil law, common law,
Exactly. So they have this need to be able to do, it's very inefficient how it works today. They need to be able to do real-time chargebacks and accounting between these different entities and different jurisdictions like you talked about. So they've partnered with ServiceNow for this capability that is now in production. You can imagine over time, all enterprises have this need to do real-time accounting on the one hand between different business units, but also real-time chargebacks as well. And you can do that by tokenizing basically the invoices between these departments and settling them in real time. And then ServiceNow has other capabilities. So if you start to think, oh, well, that's just one company, that doesn't need high throughput. But if you talk about tens of thousands of companies doing this in real time, obviously you need a network that is incredibly high throughput. So and then there are other applications that I can't talk about that also necessitate, these properties as well. And what I think is going to happen is, Hedera is just going to be the de facto standard for these types of applications. And then Hedera is going to compete for those other applications that are real Web3 native type applications that you're seeing over time. So I think it's sort of bi-directional, right? You've got your enterprise coming and adding decentralization, and then you've got your sort of native decentralized applications. And, Hedera is going to be able to compete on both of these legs of the industry.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. Think about predictable fees as one thing that changes how developers or even IT planners plan about these things. Because even carbon credit, right? If you want to say, oh, I want to offset my carbon credit for my NFT transfer. Well, the transfer of the carbon credit costs as much as the transfer of the NFT. So you have to have a platform that's much cheaper to be able to do these multiple reconciliation accounting step and still not balloon your fee from $25 a transaction to, okay, on a roll up, maybe 1/4 of that, but it's not 1/100th of a cent. So I think this idea of fee is really important consideration in kind of qualification of certain types of consumer or at least enterprise application for now. Let me ask you a question. It was very interesting. You talked about this idea of internal accounting turning into a public network. So, we at Cardstack, did some kind of exploration with the airline industry to think about settlement of airline miles between each other. And the question is, okay, let's say you do the airline settling between themselves. Let's say a bank, a credit card issuers were selling points in bulk. That can be settled. But what about the consumer? And then there's always been a very strict gate between, oh, you're going to pick one set of solution, blockchain, DLT, or otherwise for the enterprise use case. And when the consumer, I'm not sure we can do that. Do you see the scalability and the plan that when these things become more public network, the consumer can actually participate directly against these kind of chargebacks and billings and maybe even commercial opportunity around rewards and coupons? Do you see the Hedera being something that regular people through the mobile device will use?
That is a great question. I think the promise of public DLT, public blockchain, is that you have this highly participatory economy, right? Where you and I do have access to instruments that we don't in today's world. So yes is the answer. I don't think we can even envision today exactly how it will unfold over time. But one example, and they're public sort of talking about this idea, although it is not built out yet, another council member, Standard Bank, which is the largest bank in Africa, on the African continent, they've talked about the bond markets being closed markets today. There are just a handful of participants globally that can access the bond markets themselves. And wherever you see closed private markets, dark pools, this sort of thing, that's a good application of public blockchain, public DLT. And they want to open up that whole market and decentralize the bond market so that, initially there are more participants, maybe more banks involved, maybe more entities involved, but over time, so that retail investors can take advantage of a market that today they just simply cannot gain access to. So your observation about airline miles, these are closed systems today as
Very
well,
close.
right?
Yeah.
So
a lot of time it's like, oh, it's take 24 hours to transfer. A person literally go to one computer, deduct 5,000 points, go to another computer and add 5,000, right? That's literally what happens behind the scenes.
Yeah, so it's not hard to believe that if the airlines themselves see value, consumer loyalty increasing because they open up those markets, that public blockchains will be at the center of that kind of economy as well. Like I'd love right now, right? We're having this conversation. You tell me, oh, I'm going to, I don't know where you're traveling to. I'm traveling to Singapore next week or something, and I don't have enough.
I'm going to Paris for ETHCC, so Paris.
Perfect, right? You're going to Paris for ETHCC, and oh, you're like 10,000 airline miles short. And I say, oh, I've got, I'm not traveling for a while. I've got 100,000, I'll transact with you right now. You give me a couple of $100, I'll give you 10,000 points. And we just do that transaction and it settles in 3 seconds, tiny cost to you and me. Mm-hmm. You're happy, I'm happy, the airline's happy, they've got your booking, right? You're not shopping around trying to find the cheapest flight. So when will we see that day? I don't know, but it feels inevitable, right? That we'll get there.
Yeah, I think we've been part of, for example, the Hyperledger Linux Foundation organization, and hearing conversation about enterprises, and we are obviously participating in Web3 on those kind of native Web3 application. The convergence of the terminology and what they talk about is pointing toward the same direction, but there's definitely a friction between programming model of Hyperledger Fabric, Corda R3, and obviously. I like cockroach technologies. I call it technology that would never go away. It would just be around forever. JavaScript on the front end and EVM or Ethereum Solidity. If developers know how to express the business logic in a way and then can trust that it can be executed cheaply and fast, eventually there's no difference between the type of enterprise backend integration. In fact, those integration into the blockchain is valuable. Oh, I see this ledger change. Let me go and update my internal ledger. It's totally doable. It's an integration people can do, and exchange do it all the time, right? They take a look at the public ledger on Bitcoin and update the internal ledger based on that, right?
I can do you one better on that. So, we talked about the Hedera consensus service,
right?
That exposes that hashgraph consensus algorithm. So we have connectors from Hyperledger Fabric and R3 Corda, where you can just in a easy line of code swap out your internal consensus algorithm, if it's Raft or Paxos or something like that, for the trust, transparency, and consensus algorithm of Hedera. You just literally use the connector, take your private network, say, oh, we're not going to run our own consensus nodes anymore. We're going to inherit the trust of Hedera.
Right.
And now you've got this hybrid private public type of instantiation. And I think like we saw enterprises start with private clouds and move to public clouds, we're beginning to see the same with blockchains as well.
That makes a lot of sense, and the migration is possible because the initial private cloud migration make people feel more comfortable with virtual machines and storage services, and once you have that, the abstraction can be switched. It's like, oh, okay, this is a network that's shared, but you still have the same policy, and there are a lot of people who can help with that. I think that the initial idea that this is a decentralized ledger, and then you're going to program it in these programs that floats on top of this kind of VM layer. Once that migration of the mentality, there's a lot of opportunity to improve throughput and stuff. I love this idea that people have made investment in like quarters in their kind of a unique workflow language, and with their own really interesting flavor of Bitcoin inside the network, and know that underlying it, I can make the consensus go fast. And performance is a big concern, even for Corda users, of whether they can actually transact at that speed, at that cost. So very cool to see that happen. On the aspects of the kind of more native DeFi application, obviously we see a lot of developers who are programming Solidity pretty bought into the layer 2 on top of ETH2 as their promised land. Baby steps and big steps remain to be taken. The merge is a big part of it. How do you guys think of positioning Hedera within that type of cultural migration towards that model of L2 roll-ups versus one where looks like there's a little bit more similarity in that particular, from a community point of view, on Avalanche C-chain with subnets, trying to get some developer to own their own chain, leverage the consensus, but having their own thing. Do you see a similar different approach, and how do you kind of inject yourself into that set of development with the Web3 enthusiast?
Yeah, that is a great question. And we're early in this journey because in January of this year, we deployed as a service our fully compatible EVM smart contract service that is high throughput as well. It has the same properties. It's not as fast as the consensus service and token service because smart contracts are much more computationally intense, right? But it can do hundreds of transactions per second, and it has these fixed low cost capabilities, and it has this very low environmental footprint. It wasn't enough just to bring the smart contract service to market, though. You also need all of the tooling around it that smart contract developers, Solidity developers are used to programming with, right? You need Truffle, or you need Hard Hat, and you need MetaMask, and you need all of this stuff. So
app tools, that's just like that, but what people really
all of the testing and all of this. So since releasing that smart contract service, the Hedera community and Ethereum Solidity community have been letting us know about what is missing from the ecosystem, and we're filling those gaps very quickly. And we just finished on May 16th our smart contract hackathon, and we ended that hackathon with 2,500 participants. 60% of them are net new to Hedera, coming from Ethereum. And what I think, so layer twos are really interesting, because if you set out from the get-go, you would never invent a layer two. If your layer one is fast enough, cheap enough, can do all secure, why would you ever use a layer two? And that's the bet that we're making, right? That Hedera, because it has these unique properties, can provide everything that developers need, especially with costs as well. Because even doing rollups, like you said earlier, you can lower your costs, but you can't really make them negligible. I think we're going to see over the next 3 to 5 years, as ETH2 rolls out. And you mentioned, there are other systems taking different approaches, like Avalanche and Polkadot and these things. Like as these smart contract based platforms mature, what types of applications gravitate to what kind of layer one and layer two networks? I think where we are going to excel is not everything should be in the smart contract. You want to keep your smart contract as small a footprint as possible and call it only when you need to call it. And then you want to put other features into other services that are even faster and lower cost. So one of the advantages of Hedera is because it has the consensus service and the token service that can be used in conjunction with the smart contract service. I think we're going to see a different blend of applications that emerge just based off of the possibilities there. And maybe what we're seeing with more traditional Web3 applications, maybe they consolidate on other chains. Maybe they do move to Hedera, but I think it's too early to tell today.
Yeah. Our vision is that eventually, much like the same way you have one mobile phone that has many apps on it, but it integrates with services from Apple, Netflix, and Google, that the integration is in the glass. We call it the glass that you're looking at is where it's integration. And that could be a browser, could be a mobile app. We definitely think that, there's too many very interesting things going on in the EVM adjacent community, proof of stake, even proof of work community with Lightning is extremely interesting. The user needs to feel like through their phone, through the chips and this key that they have keys, plural, to different empires, but it has to make sense to them. We're still in the sense that the dApps are everywhere. They're just sprinkled everywhere else. It's almost like open up random doors in the matrix to see what you can get in there. But we really want to bring it together into that human experience, and that's why we are building a wallet technology and native app around that, and also a dApp framework to allow for composable applications like that. I don't know if you're familiar with ServiceNow. I'm sure you're familiar with Salesforce. You can add a lot of features in Salesforce that works very consistently that then connects to the external service. We want to build like the Salesforce design system, component system, tapped system for crypto. And that's all we're doing. We're not doing any consensus. We're just talking to folks like yourself who are working on, oh, that's really interesting. So one thing that came into my mind is that if you have really high throughput EVM transaction, then you can do reward points and payment using EVM. And we have a contract that does that on Gnosis chain. That would be great to see, okay, now we're paying this amount of thing. We can do that many transactions. If we deploy those EVM contracts to Hedera hashgraph EVM, what can we do? Because those capability, when you have invoicings done on chain, then you can do things like merchant cash advance and invoice discounting, all these composability DeFi concept that we want to work on, but they get more and more expensive, right?
Yeah.
And might get more logic to it, but we're very interested in
and separating out the logic, right? Your token transfers don't have to happen in the smart contract.
Right.
You don't want to bloat your smart contract. You don't need all the account information in the smart contract. So Hedera allows for optimizing your workloads depending on what you need to achieve. Yeah. And I think you have nailed exactly where we're at in our evolution. Why do we care? Today, we do care what the blockchain is underneath. We care, but I can't wait for the day where this stuff is just invisible, right? I hope in that day, Hedera is the winner, right? And it's the default option for all of it. But the fact that you even talk about, what blockchain is underlying your application, we stopped talking about TCP/IP, decades ago, right? Yep. So, I think that's, I can't wait for that. And I think what you're doing as far as abstracting away all of that complexity, when we get there, it'll be a very different world.
Yeah, I think, we see ourselves as one of the few projects working on front-end composability, which is a hard problem, right? There's an entire ecosystem of JavaScript developer and conferences all around the world just discussing how to make a button so you can click on the button and then things pop up, right? It's not easy to orchestrate the browser in this asynchronous manner to magically give more detail when you double click on it. It's a hard problem, especially if you want multiple people, multiple development team to contribute. Oh, you need a swap, or there's a standard swap function that works with all Uniswap. Oh, you have a special swap? Here's an override that allows you to see the detail for this particular new LP position widget. We want to have those things be in the library. But the goal is when the user finish and learn the tools and there's a protocol upgrade or even migration from one execution environment, the URL stays the same. Right now, that's not true, right? Because your data work, the URL changes, or worse yet, that you didn't renew the domain name and a hacker took over the domain name and stole all your MetaMask assets like CryptoPunk just because you connected to a DEX that you trusted the day before the domain name expired. So we're working on the front-end technology, but the ability to actually approach commercial scale for commercial transaction is definitely a prerequisite before even our vision can be there. It seems like you guys are making headways towards that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love for you to take a look and deploy some of your smart contracts and play around with it and give us feedback. It would be really interesting. But I love what you're doing. I think it's so essential. It's like we took a big leap forward in the underlying technology and a giant leap backwards in usability.
We wrote a white paper in 2017 and we were acknowledging the bifurcations of tokens and networks and things and say we want to build the experience layer, the cohesive experience layer of decentralized internet or Web3, what is called now. And it's a hard problem. Right, because while we are trying to integrate technology changing faster, so how do you put it on top? So we feel like JavaScript, which is our expertise, is really where the breakthrough has to come. We are the web in the Web3. We're working on the web technology part, not just saying, host a website on this little host that can disappear. We're trying to work on those problems and obviously working with decentralized service provider. I'd love to keep in touch on this. I think our payment and reward system around consumer payment could be a very good fit. With the speed and low cost throughput of your EVM solution, and also obviously the token aspects of it. We're coming towards the end of our time here. Is there something that Hedera is working on right now, let's say in the next 6 to 12 months, that you expect that you think that someone who has been paying attention to Hedera will be surprised, and someone who is like for the first time hearing Hedera will have an aha moment? Is there something like that in the future that you would kind of like maybe shed a light on?
So I do think for developers, it's really around the smart contract service combined with the Hedera token service and making that. So yesterday, we just announced a Hedera improvement proposal around the JSON RPC relay, which allows developers to point at Hedera just like they would point at a different blockchain network
Like a
and
test
deploy
net or like
to mainnet, right?
Mm.
So Hedera has traditionally looked so different from everything else in the market. What we are realizing for developer adoption that have invested time and cycles learning other stuff, it's not okay to go to them and try and re-educate them. You have to speak their language and you have to provide the tooling. And so I think people that looked at Hedera early on and didn't see that, that's where they're going to be very surprised, is coming back and saying, wow, all of the time and energy I've spent learning Solidity, writing my smart contracts, now in a few minutes, I can deploy that to Hedera and be up and running, and all my tooling works and all my tests work. That's exciting for me. And then I'd say the other thing is where you talked about earlier, really participating. We have staking coming out, and especially for our long-time community, that's been something that they've been waiting on a long time. And then the ability to run community nodes. So if we deliver on those this year, along with this, leap forward on smart contracts and tokenization, yeah, I'm very excited. If we just did that for the next couple of years, that's enough probably.
Yeah, I love this idea that the meaningful participation for people who's been part of the community get first dibs on the economic opportunity. Some people say, oh, it's too permission. I want totally permissionless. But when we have totally permissionless airdrop and stuff like that, you get a lot of mercenary behavior, and it takes the most valuable resource of the community, the underlying tokens and the community kind of glue, and just gave it to people who are just here to do a financial trade. I think it's so cool that you're looking at the organic participation as a little bit of a badge of honor for that participation in the next era of decentralization. That's absolutely right. I think that's the true community building versus just driving up your Discord count and driving up your Telegram groups. It's really great to hear you guys rewarding your long-term participants.
Yeah, we definitely do not have the biggest community in the crypto industry by any stretch of the imagination, but we have an incredibly knowledgeable, friendly, welcoming community. It's been so cool to see them build, over the last 4 years. And I'm excited on that front too, because I think like attracts like, and, Hedera community is going to attract more and more folks like them over time and scale exponentially. And yeah, our industry is all about community building, really. We'd be nothing without a community.
Absolutely. And I think, different communities form and dissipate at different paces. If you draw the community life cycles, there are some more high frequency community that kind of tracks and pumps and dumps, I feel like, and that slower one that tracks the overall crypto cycle. But the one that actually becomes the one that you can see that long-term trend, you zoom out, is around developer users participate, and really looking at this as building a future kind of capability for building commercial transactions and things that we use in our daily lives. And as much as people say, I used to have an enterprise IT background running R&D for a large organization, they was like, oh, enterprise is like so boring. It's like, yeah, but one software deployment that doesn't work affects 2 million people, right? Like we are always, we have users of our software and we affect people's life. And I think taking that idea that we are actually building for the people on earth and not just a slice of people side betting on the economy on a couple of exchanges, I think those are the users we are optimized for. It seems like you're doing that, in merging that enterprise foundation and this new community angle is very cool. So
Definitely.
is there any other things you want to share with us as we come to the end of this show?
No, I mean, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I can talk about this stuff all day long. It sounds like
You're
you
so
can talk about
knowledgeable.
this stuff all day
Yeah,
long. So I'm happy to come back on in the future.
yeah.
Maybe in a few months' time, we can see, some of the stuff we talked about today. How is it unfolding? Because that's always you have an idea, you have a thesis, but then it's got to play out in the real world.
Yes, and the development is steady. Like, this idea of having more than one viable EVM runtime was a dream when we started exploring layer 2. We end up settling on Gnosis chain because it was the first one, XDAI chain, that was really an alternative, and Polygon and C chain and your implementation. These are all coming, Optimism and Arbitrum. So we are in a much more interesting thing. But I agree with you. I don't care if Facebook use MySQL or SQL Server or Oracle, right? I care that it's a
Yeah.
great experience and they're able to help me connect with my people, hopefully protect my privacy. But you know what? I trust the people who are working in Web3, especially people outside of the immediate kind of like crypto trading community. Really someone who's looking at that as a substrate for this value creation that we can share on together. So exciting.
That's right. Well, thank you for having me, Chris. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. And again, as always, thank you for our community, for your time and attention. Until next time, take care.